just disappears. So can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Marvellous stuff. Okay, I'm Geoff, and I'm going to get some feedback if I don't turn that down a fraction. G8PPQ, been licensed since 1978, worked in radio comms for quite a while. The reason I sort of researched and got to sort of semi-expert level on radar, a couple of things really. Mainly I was mainly interested in the radio and technical aspects of it. Also, my father-in-law, he worked at Ash Radar. Prior to that, he worked at Gatwick on the radar systems, and prior to that, he was in the Navy. So there was a lot of interest there as well. So I started reading up on it and looking online and buying books and all sorts. Hello, Roo.
Good evening, everyone.
And basically, I sort of got going on radar like that. I find it quite fascinating because it sort of combines two of my interests, both sort of radio and transmission and aircraft. Been a bit of a plane spotter since I was little. So anyway, if we start sort of whizzing through the slides, this was fun and games, doing a bit of PowerPoint, never done it before. So all starts off in this country properly. If this is going to work, wrong button, try that one. In 1932, there was a speech in Parliament by Stanley Baldwin, where he came out with the immortal words, "The bomber will always get through." Also at this time, there was a lot of science fiction films going around of complete devastation, and people started to panic, including the Air Ministry. So they were also noticing that Hitler was rearming and secretly building his air force up under the guise of civilian transport aircraft, but it wasn't. They was building lots of bombers and all sorts of things and fighters. So they needed some way of detecting these aircraft. Now, prior to this time, the aircraft were quite slow, and they thought they could make do by just the observer corps seeing these aircraft coming across the top of Dover, or by sound detection. So they set off and started to build a load of sound mirrors all around the Romney Marsh area, which are still there and very, very visible. Oops, I'm pushing the wrong button, sorry about that. That's not an English version of a sound mirror. It's something they come up with. It's terribly sort of bad design, but they did work badly. There you go, there's the pictures of the sound mirrors down behind the back of Greatstone and Littlestone. Famously, they tried to do a demonstration, and the guy that had to stand in the middle of it was almost deafened by a milk cart going up Dungeness. And obviously it wasn't very good. Aircraft speeds were increasing rather than the bombers sort of thundering along at 90 miles an hour. They're now doing up to 300 miles an hour, and they could cross the channel in just over 5 minutes. So they needed something drastically to be able to detect the aircraft way out before it got anywhere near us. Because the aircraft at the time, the fighters, needed quite a bit of time to get to height to intercept the bombers, which were normally coming in at around about 20,000 feet, something like that. Next slide, please. I'm sounding like Chris Whitty, don't I? That's the large mirror. Not only did they have people sort of posted in amongst it to get different directions of the reflections off the parabola, but they also set up microphones, like sort of stereo microphones in there, and had them amplified through. They could hear an aircraft at about 20 miles, but not accurately, and they couldn't get the exact direction or the height or anything like that. So it's pretty dire. But they're still there, and I think they do walks around it now. So you can sort of whiz around there and have a look around once, twice a year. There's sort of guided tours of it. So, with all this talk about science fiction and all the rest of it, there was a rumour going around that the Germans had discovered a death ray. This is around about 1934 now. So the Air Ministry decided to offer a prize to anyone that could kill a sheep at 200 yards. Poor old Sean. So a number of people took this idea up. Among them was this Scottish engineer, scientist chap called Robert Watson Watt, who had been working on layers of the ionosphere and trying to get the different heights of the different layers of the ionosphere. So he was ideally suited for this. And he couldn't, it was secret at the time, so he couldn't tell his assistant Arnold Wilkins what it was for. So he just asked Arnold Wilkins to work out how much power would be necessary to boil 8 pints of water at 200 yards, as in 8 pints of blood, to kill a pilot or whatever. So he went away and did all the calculations, and it turned out to be 5 gigawatts, which was more than the whole national grid could supply at one time. So they gave up that idea. However, Robert Watson Watt went away and scratched his head and said, I think I can come up with an idea of how to detect aircraft with radio waves. So the government said, okay, prove it. So he had to very, very quickly set up some sort of method of showing that he can actually detect an aircraft using radio. Click the right button this time, not the laser. So this is a famous experiment known as the Daventry experiment, where he and Arnold Wilkins set off in an old van, not sure it's an ice cream van or a post office van or something like that, and they put an oscilloscope in there and a pair of receivers and a pair of dipoles, and they went up and set up around about 10 miles away from the big BBC transmitter at Daventry, which was running a hell of an output on about 6 megahertz. They set up the dipoles. There's not a picture of it there. They set up the dipoles in a field, and they used some phasing equipment to phase out the signal of Daventry so it appeared as 0 on the scope. And they had an RAF Hayford bomber fly in between them and the transmitter. And on the first pass, absolutely nothing happened. I think they hit the oscilloscope and scratched their heads, and on the second pass, it did happen. And everyone was very impressed and decided to give them free rein to go and develop the idea. There's a picture of a Herne Hayford, very, very outdated even at that time, double-wing bomber. But it proved to be a good target for the radio waves to bounce off from Daventry. So they then moved to Orford Ness and dragged in a few other people to help out on the research. And they'd set up a very, very makeshift station, also on the 6 megahertz band, using just a pair of dipoles set up on the beach. And the output valve was one borrowed or used from the HF transmitters at Daventry, and they increased the power dramatically by just putting the HT on the valve up from 5,000 volts to 12,000 volts to get a bit more output, really pushing it hard. And eventually, the experiment was successful. They showed to the Air Ministry that they detected a seaplane flying along about 12 or 15 miles out to sea from Orford Ness. And at that point, the Air Ministry said, right, okay, have as much money as you need to develop this system as quickly as you possibly can. Because by that time, the Spanish Civil War was just about kicking off. And Hitler was helping out the Spanish government, I think, or the rebels, one side or the other, by sending a stack of Heinkels and all sorts of bombers over there and absolutely demolishing parts of Spain. And they saw this all happening and thought, oh my goodness, it's going to happen here soon. There's a picture of Heinkel 11. And the reason they was using 6 megahertz at the start of the research was it happened to be the half wave length of the wingspan of a Heinkel 111. which is just about right. So about 23 meters is about half wave of 6 megahertz. Obviously, that's a very efficient reflector to RF at that sort of frequency. However, later as they progressed, they found that it didn't really matter an awful lot what frequency they used. They went to shorter wavelengths, which made the building of the towers, etc., a lot easier. Sorry if my voice is cracking up, but it does that when I speak for too long at a time. They then moved to Bawdsey Manor in Suffolk, which is a location not too far away from Orfordness, very close to Felixstowe. And the government built the government bought the manor off the owner for £24,000, and they had as much money as they could just thrown at them to develop this system. They went around trying to get technical people because there wasn't too many people involved in technicalities of radios at that point, and they had RAF technical officers going around to local radio clubs in civvies and talking to them, finding out the most sorry, voice has gone a bit. The amateurs amongst them who knew what they was on about and had been building equipment and secretly recruiting them from radio clubs and, of course, from other technical places like the BBC. There was a huge need amongst the development of this radar to use parts that we already had because we did not have the time to research from scratch. So they borrowed an awful lot of the equipment from the early radio and television industry. Television was going through sort of testing at that point from Alexander Palace on Channel 1 VHF, which was happening, working at 45 megahertz. And within a year from moving to Bawdsey, they had managed to build 5 chain home stations around the southeast coast, of which Dover was one of the first ones to be built. There's a picture of the towers used for the transmitter side of chain home. They were 360 feet steel towers, and the shape of them, you see the sort of the 3 bits that stick out. They're nothing to do with the aerials. They are gantries for the workers to go up there and string the dipoles between the towers. I always thought they looked like very strange aerials themselves, but they were just literally gantries for the workers to string the dipoles. They had a nest of dipoles spaced. I can't remember what the spacing is. It's probably up there somewhere. Yeah, they had them at different heights because of the lobes, the radiation angle. The ones higher up were a lower radiation angle and could detect at a distance, but they found that once they got a bit closer, the signals got weaker because the lobe was going like that. So they put another set of aerials down the bottom, which had a higher angle and could still track the bombers coming through. There's a photograph on the right of the receiving towers, and the receiving towers were separate from the transmitting aerials. These were wooden towers, 240 foot tall, with a set of cross dipoles with switch reflectors on the back of them. The transmitter sent out a pulse on a wide angle. It wasn't directional, really. And the direction finding was all done by changing the phase of the receive aerials with something called a goniometer, which will come up shortly. But there's a photograph of the Dover Swingate radar station as it was during the war. You can see barrage balloons in the distance top left-hand corner to show the picture was taken actually during the war, and the docks down the bottom there on the right-hand side. Absolutely massive things, and I think there's still 2 towers. Are there 2 towers left now? But they haven't got the gantries on them anymore. They've just got sort of microwave dishes and all sorts of things on them now. That's the Dunkirk one, of which there's 1 tower left standing now, and that's got all sorts of radio transmitters on. Will that have your signal on, Steve, from radio cabin?
No,
Oh, what a shame. That'd be quite a good signal if that was there. The rollout of the chain home stations was completed by 1939, thank goodness. And there's a map of the UK with all the stations dotted all around the east and south coasts. There are some other dots here, which is a different system called chain home low, which was designed to look further down. So planes skimming the ocean and the sea would be detected where chain home itself wouldn't detect them. And they worked on a VHF system of around about 200 megahertz.
Nice.
Go ahead.
On that map that you've got there, obviously you've got the east coast areas.
Yeah. That's it.
From Europe. But is there anything developed since then on the west coast?
Oh, it's all around the place now.
Now.
Yeah, totally different kettle of fish now. There's all sorts of civil radars all over the place now that sort of double up as military ones as well. The theory of how it works is that the transmitter sends out a very quick pulse. We're talking a number of microseconds, and then listens for a period of time after that. And the time period between the send out and the receive back gives a distance to the target. The display on the right-hand side in green shows the transmitter pulse and then a time period of nothing, and then the received pulse coming back. And that works out the distance to target. So the screens of the chain home operators look like that. Very, very basic. The transmitter pulse is on the far left-hand side. You can't quite see it there. And then there's a scale of how many miles away. And it was pretty much all down to the skill of the operators to interpret the blips and work out whether it's just one aircraft or a group of aircraft or a high number of aircraft. The angle that the aircraft are away from the station was worked out by this goniometer thing, which adjusted the phase of the receive aerials into the receivers. And they just peaked it for the maximum amount of deflection, and then read off the angle to get the direction. A lot of the operators were Women's Auxiliary Air Force. They were deemed better at this job because they sort of took more notice and could sort of interpret things better than guys. Plus the guys were off sort of fighting the war by then.
Also, the women will say that they listen.
Of course. I think we also know that they also talk a lot more, don't they? No, it's us. We don't listen. There's a picture of a goniometer. It's a sort of a wire cage where the aerial signal comes in, and you rotate the coil in the middle and read off the dial the degrees away from the azimuth or whatever. Azimuth, that's the one. What we had over the Germans was something called the Dowding system, which was a way of filtering all the information from the radar stations, the observer core, etc., into a filter room where everything was interpreted before being sent out to the group and sector stations to launch the fighters to intercept them. This is something the Germans didn't have. They did not have an integrated system, although they did have radar, and their radar was much better than ours. Ours was thrown together in a hurry. They've been working on it for ages, and they was up at VHF and UHF systems while we were still playing around with 23 megahertz or something. But we had this system, and it just worked so much better. We could detect the bombers, find out where they're going to, how many there were, get the fighters in the air in time, and take a few pot shots at them. Now, with chain home, the power levels were absolutely astronomical, but it was with a very short duty cycle. The pulses, like I say, were microseconds long, and they absolutely overrated the valves they had, something chronically. So at the start of the war, there was around about 100 kilowatts, and at the end of the war, they was using 750 kilowatt pulses. And that's enough to make your hair stand on, isn't it, really? There was a very low pulse repetition frequency, PRF, of 25 hertz. They could switch it to 12.5 hertz to get better range. And they initially were operating on 22 megahertz. But they continuously changed, and they had a number of different frequencies they could switch in up to about 50 megs. They was all locked to the national grid to get the synchronization right. And different stations all around the coast all had their little slots of that 50 hertz signal that they could transmit on, so they didn't interfere with each other. I don't know how technical you want me to get about this.
What type of valve were they?
Yeah, I'm just about to come up. Just a moment. Yeah. They absolutely throttled those valves. They put 35 kV on the anodes, which is a hell of a lot. And the heaters took an amazing 140 amps. And they were continuously evacuated valves that had to be disassembled and replaced about once a week because the cathodes were completely stripped. And there was a continuous vacuum pump on them. So they weren't a sealed unit, it wasn't a glass bulb, so to speak. It had a metal jacket around the outside with water cooling. You can just imagine how much power. You could imagine trying to listen to your shortwave radio while this was going on. It'd just be like that all the time. I wouldn't have thought the signal had been too clean either, really. There's a picture of one of the valves in pieces. The sleeve around the outside on the right-hand side and the internals of the valve on the left, all taken apart. Like I said, they needed to be replaced about once a week because they just used to destroy them. You're interested? There's the circuit of the transmitter. Looks very simple. It's just one big PA with a lot of volts on it. Basically, there's a pair of output tubes driven by another pair of tubes driven by another one, and the big problem was making these very short pulses of just a few microseconds. But that's not covered by this chat at the moment. There's a picture of one of the chain home transmitters. That's at Neatishead Radar Museum, which is a fantastic museum in Norfolk near Wroxham and very worthwhile going to. The Radar Museum at Bawdsey Manor, when I was there last year, was a little bit of a disappointment. I thought it'd be much better, but the Neatishead one is absolutely brilliant museum. And it's amazing when you walk up to this thing and just look at it and think, oh my goodness gracious, the amount of power that thing put out. Just before the war started, the Germans, like I said, who had VHF, UHF radars by then, wanted to find out if we had something. They'd noticed these towers going up and wondered what on earth's going on. So they sent a Zeppelin, the Graf Zeppelin LZ-130, I think it is, up the English Channel, up as far as Scotland and back again. And it was tracked by our chain home all the way there and all the way back. And the recon crew inside the Zeppelin had stacks of receivers. And they were scanning the VHF bands, listening for a high PRF, a tone pulse repetition frequency of hundreds of hertz. And all they was getting all the time was this over everything. And they put it down to our national grid being very leaky and arcing all the time because of the frequency that's coming out of it. So they went back home and said, no, there's nothing there at all. They haven't got anything, which is amazing. But we tracked it. And after the war finished, about 1950 or so, one of our technical guys, I think it was R.V. Jones, was talking to the General Martini, who was the opposite side of the German radar chief. And he told him that he tracked the Zeppelin, and the guy said, no, you didn't. Yes, we did. It's amazing. Right, where are we now?
Excuse me.
Go ahead.
You know, on your power and frequency slide, 2 slides ago,
Going back.
and you said that it started out with 100 kilowatts.
Yeah.
You made a joke about, oh, we'll make a hair stand on it.
I'd say it would.
Was there actually any people in voltages? Get EMS.
I'm sure any one of the aerial riggers who might be up there at the time when it's on might have had their fingers blown off.
Because obviously this stuff is very experimental.
Yeah, well, I'm sure Google might have the answers, but unfortunately I don't. But I'm sure there were lots of accidents, and there's some very dangerous voltages and wattages going on there. Although it wouldn't heat you up like modern microwave stuff. I expect it gave people headaches when it was close to it. Right, we seem bored. Where were we? Here we go. A fill-in also in the system was the chain home low, which was also put around the coast around about the same time, just a fraction after chain home itself. Was working on VHF. And they managed to get 150 kilowatts at 200 megs out of these things. And initially, the rotating dishes weren't rotating, not like you'd expect. They were manually steered. And there was a case of there was a station up near Scotland somewhere where the rotation method was a bicycle mounted on a frame with the wheels taken off, and the guy had to sort of pedal it to move the dish round. So that's sort of makeshift, but it worked. These things were amazing. So there's a number of chain home low stations. Like I said, they got the low flying aircraft. If there's aircraft coming in skimming the waves at 100 foot or so, these will get them where the main chain home wouldn't. Sorry, the voice is cracking up a bit. That's better. Right. Also, a side shoot from chain home low is the ground controlled intercept radars. As well as the main chain home system feeding back to Bentley Priory and then going out to the sector stations and the airfields, they also needed to guide fighters from various other places directly. So they set up a few of these stations, and they now have fully rotating aerials and a PPI display, of which that's the different type of display you expect to see on a radar station, where it scans round as it follows the aerial and shows a pip where the target is. So one of these stations was at Sandwich. I don't know whether anyone's noticed it in the field. Near where they got the water park now, not far from Pfizer's, there's a number of brick buildings in that field, and they were the plinths that the radar station was on before they moved up to Ash, which came a little bit later. Next slide, please. The Germans, like I said, they had a much better system than we had technically, but they just didn't have the infrastructure to act on it properly. Their main radar for initial contact with an aircraft is called the Freya. Freya was a Norse goddess who had the ability to hear things a long way away. So that's how they named it Freya. So that worked between 120 and 130 megs, which is now the airband, and had about 20 kilowatt output. And that was fully rotational. But they had no infrastructure, like I said, so they would then phone up the local airfield and say, oh, there's a plane over whatever, Bordeaux or whatever. Go and have a look at it, sort of thing. So they just didn't talk to each other. The three services of the German Army and Navy and Air Force, they just didn't talk to each other. They hated each other. Really, really odd. Another type of radar that the Germans had were the Würzburgs. And these were a UHF system working on around about 560 megahertz. There were two types. There was a normal size one, which is on the left there, which is about 2.4 meter dish. And then there's a giant Würzburg on the right, which I think had about, about 6 or 7 meter dish. Basically the same innards, but just a bigger aerial, so it gave it more range and very, very directional, being UHF into a parabolic dish. There was a reconnaissance flight that Spitfire made, and this is the famous picture that it took of a Würzburg radar at a place called Bruneval, which is near Le Havre. And they was looking at this, and they needed to know the ins and outs and technicalities of this radar so they could come up with countermeasures. So a commando force was sent out to go in there, parachute down, and dismantle this radar and bring it back. And there was a German garrison about a quarter of a mile away, and they had to sneak in. They had to kidnap the technical guys that were with the radar there in that building. And they had, amongst the commandos, they had one qualified radio officer. I think his name was Cox. And the commandos were under orders that if they were get captured at all, they had to shoot and kill this bloke because he knew too much about our radar. So I wouldn't fancy that job. But they did manage successfully, after a bit of a firefight, to get down on the beach and then get rescued by one of our submarines. And they brought the bits and pieces of the radar back, and they could determine the output power, frequency, and all the bits and pieces that were needed to know for countermeasures. The German system of interception, where the Freya radar picks up the bomber's stream first with some degree of accuracy, then it's handed over to a Würzburg, which also could control the anti-aircraft guns, so they could get near shots on target at the right height, and also to steer in night fighters, which were equipped with a very basic VHF or UHF system of radar themselves. There's a picture of a German Ju-88 with some aerials on the front. That one's got two sets of aerials. They used two different systems on the German night fighters. One was called SN2, which was at 90 megahertz. The other one was Liechtenstein, which worked at 400 and something megahertz. Can't remember, 400 and something. And this was very basic with quite a short range, but it's all they needed. There's a picture of a Dornier 17 with the Liechtenstein radar on the front of the nose. Quite small 2-element Yagis, all pointing forwards. 1.5 kilowatts up to 4 kilometers range. So once they get steered onto target by the ground radar, they then get within 4K and can zoom in on our bombers, unfortunately. That's the SN2 radar, bigger aerials because it's down at VHF, 2.5 kilowatts up to 8 kilometers. That's in the nose of a BF 110, Messerschmitt 110. And you can see the rather nasty cannons and machine guns all strapped around it, ready to try and shoot down our bombers. What we had on the back of our bombers is something called Monica. This was a very basic short-range radar that worked around about 300 megs and could give a short warning to the pilot and gunners of an enemy fighter equipped with radar or whatever behind it. And also we had a system called Boozer, which was completely passive, which just listened for the radar of the enemy fighters coming up behind the bomber, where you could do the same with a diode and an aerial and a pair of headphones. These days, you just listen for the PRF frequency going like that. You know something's back there. Jumping backwards in time a little bit, in September 1940, just after the Battle of Britain finished, well, not finished, but it had its hardest day, to try to get America on our side, because they were neutral for quite a while in the Second World War. They sent a mission across there with a stack of our military secrets to try and entice the Americans to come and help. And amongst the bits and pieces taken were our atomic research stuff, which helped them no end at Los Alamos in creating the atomic bomb. Plans for a Whittle's jet engine, and something called a cavity magnetron. Now, the cavity magnetron had been developed about a year or so before that time by a pair of professors at Birmingham University called Randall and Boot. We needed some form of generating microwave radar because the VHF and UHF systems that we could use had very low output power and very difficult to get a valve to work at those sort of output powers. And the equipment's small enough, light enough to go in an aircraft, and the directionability of centimetric radar would be so much better. So they eventually managed to get something going that could generate the enormous power of 10 kilowatts first off at about 3 gigahertz. Now, prior to that, the only equipment that would generate those sort of frequencies was called a klystron, which was a normal sort of valve. And this is one. This is the klystron. And all these could do is around about 10 to 20 watts at gigahertz. So that was all the Americans had as well. They couldn't generate any decent power at microwave frequencies. Very, very gentle, put that down. It's a bit rare. So amongst this lot, they had something called the cavity magnetron. And it was just the 12th one ever built by GEC in this country. We didn't have the facilities or the capabilities to produce these things in mass. They took a lot of time and precision to build, and we didn't have the facilities. So we wanted to try and get the Americans involved. And they took one along in a suitcase amongst all the other secrets and bits and pieces. And item number 2. There's a cavity magnetron. Now, the one I've got in my hand is one that's produced right at the end of the war and was using the H2S radars on the bottom of Lancasters and B-17s and such like for ground mapping. Also had other uses. But this is round about the size of the one that they took to America, physically. And this is a working magnetron. I haven't put magnets on it, but I have run it up with the heaters and the anode, and it does work. There's still a vacuum in it. I'm not going to hand it round because it's a bit delicate, but you can come up and have a look at it when I've finished. No problem at all. Ooh. I was amazed. I actually bought a box of those at a boot fair. I was looking for them for ages, and I was at this boot fair, and this guy had a load of valves and things. I said, "Got any magnetrons?" He said, "Yes, mate, I've got a box full." "How many do you want?" I said, "Oh, I'll have one. How much?" "Oh, give us £1." He said, "You can have the old box for £10." I went away and thought, what am I going to do with the box? Then I soon turned around and bought the lot. Sold a stack online, actually made a good profit on it. But I've kept 2, and I've donated one to the Knittishead Museum, and they were quite chuffed with that. So that particular one there, the pulse output power of that is 450 kilowatts in your hand. Now you can imagine the look on the Americans' faces when all their top brass and technicians were looking at the original one with the 10 kilowatt output. And all they'd managed beforehand was sort of 20 watts output from a klystron, and suddenly 10 kilowatts. Amazing. Right, cracking on. 3 gigahertz. That one works on 3 gigahertz, 10 centimeter band, huge output power. You could use much smaller aerials and have much, much better directionability, better resolution, much smaller size, could fit in an aircraft, no problem at all. You really don't want to stand in front of one of those things when it's going. Although the actual duty cycle is just very low because, like microsecond pulse, and then off for a while. There's a picture of one in case you couldn't see that one, and the innards, how it works. It's basically a valve which self-oscillates. The secret being the cavities around the outside acted as LC circuits. The L is the round bit going round and the C is the closed part. And the electron beam from the cathode in the centre is bent round by the magnetic field when you have a big electromagnet around the outside of it. And it swirls round and round and round and is tapped off, and the output comes out their back at a huge amount of power. But like I say, these things were pulsed very quickly on and off, so they didn't dissipate too much heat, but you obviously needed to cool them down. The original one that went to America is pictured bottom right. You can see it's almost exactly the same as that one there. Okay, operational uses of centimetric radar. A big thing at the time also was the convoys coming across the Atlantic from America. They were getting absolutely decimated by German submarine packs, wolf packs as it was called. And the VHF radar system at the time in the aircraft that we were using just couldn't get them resolved enough to detect them properly. However, with the centimetric radar, they could actually pick up the periscopes of these things. Just a periscope sticking out of the water, they could pick that up and home in onto it. H2S was a blind bombing aid, working at the 10 centimetre wavelength. And the Americans increased or decreased the wavelength down to a 3 centimetre wavelength for better accuracy. H2S is a chemical symbol of hydrogen sulfide, because I think they named it that because someone said it stinks for some reason. H2X was the 3 centimetre one that came after that. There was also something called fish pond. So H2S was a ground mapping radar carried in the bottom of Lancasters that gave the outline of where you were. You could see rivers, you could see buildings, you could see the terrain underneath. Fish pond was a very similar idea. It looked down and rotated on a moving dish, and that was used for detecting night fighters coming up after the bombers. You could see the outline of the aircraft on the display and see what it is. I think the next slide shows that. Oops. So H2S is on the left-hand side, showing terrain with a dam. Fish pond, looking down for enemies, etc., is on the right-hand side, but that is a B-17. So that's a friendly one that's flying underneath the bomber, looking down on the down-looking radar. Okay, there's something else of interest. Now they had centimetric radar right at the end of the war. They put it in the tail turrets of aircraft, and it would automatically track an enemy fighter that might be trying to home in on it. And obviously, pulling the trigger was down to the guy in the turret, but it would track the guns onto the target and work it all out. Now, to stop shooting down your own aircraft that might be behind you, all aircraft started carrying an infrared light in the front, and there was a detector on the back. And if it saw the infrared light, it wouldn't fire on it. It would jam the guns so it wouldn't fire. So the amazing things they come up with at the end of the war, huge advances. And that was called Village Inn. And you can see the sort of radome at the bottom there. And I think a pair of 50 calibers, that would make a hell of a mess of a plane behind it. Shortly after D-Day, the Germans decided to be nasty. Not that they weren't nasty beforehand. Well, not exactly the Germans, but the Nazi party. Thought, right, we're going to unleash these guided weapons towards the UK. Vengeance weapons V1, otherwise known as doodlebugs, buzz bombs, whatever. And they started flying across the channel and coming down in and around London, causing a lot of chaos. And they were very, very difficult to hit with the normal anti-aircraft guns because they're very small targets and moving quite fast. There's a picture of one in flight on the left and the famous picture on the right-hand side of a Spitfire going alongside, trying to tip its wing to get it to crash. I think a number of Spitfires were damaged trying to do that sort of thing. They had to dive down on it to get the speed up to do that. But also at Manston, there was the first sort of delivery of Meteor jet fighters who weren't allowed to fly over into enemy territory, but they were used to chase down these V1s over the top of Kent before they got to London. Okay, the big thing about trying to hit a V1 with an anti-aircraft gun is that they're small and fast, and you've got to get the height of the thing to get anywhere near it with the shells that we had for anti-aircraft at the time. Initially, the shells had a fuse in them that was set with a timer. So on the ground, you have to go, oh, what height is it? Oh, how fast is it going? How much time do we need to set this fuse for between firing the gun and it going bang in the sky? And the hit rate was absolutely terrible. They had a stack of guns all round the Romney Marsh from Dungeness right round to Folkestone and Dover, trying to hit these V1s. And they was absolutely flying over and plastering us. And the hit rate was something like 17%, which was quite drastic. So they introduced something called the VT fuse, which stands for variable time, but that was a code. There's nothing to do with time. They had a radar unit built in the head of the fuse. It worked on 200 megahertz. It was basically a high-power oscillator inside. They had to design special valves and components to take the G-force of the initial shot up to the sky from the gun. And also the battery power in it. They couldn't put normal batteries in it. They had an electrolyte within a glass canister inside the shell fuse. And as the gun fired, the glass shattered, let the electrolyte out, and the battery started working. So these things would detect when they got close to a target. They would detect the metal of the target and go bang. So previously they were just going bang all over the place because they had to get the height right and the timing of it, and these things were going off bang near the target, and the hit rate went up from 17% to 74%. So that also made a big difference on trying to shoot down enemy aircraft, not just V1s. The Americans, in between time, have been working very hard on radar and such like systems, and they come up with this superb system which was interlocked with our guns. So not only did we have the VT fuses, we also had this system which was tracking the aircraft in real time, had a computer there that was linked, very early computer that was linked to the anti-aircraft guns, which are all on servos by now, and they fired at the right time with the right lead to hit the aircraft. So you can imagine how much advanced that was compared with the old ACAT guns that were just shooting blindly, really.
What type of computers is it?
Ones with big valves in. Fire control radar, something like that it's called now, gun lane radar. So that's just reiterating what I've just said about the radar guns. There's a map of the V1 shootdowns, and you can see all the little dots in the coastline going around from Dungeness round to Folkestone. That's all the successful hits that happened after they started incorporating this sort of radar guidance on the anti-aircraft guns. All the other dots are ones that have just come down all around that area, around Kent. That's mainly where they come from. They was being shot from sort of Pas de Calais and all the rest of it. So they put all the guns and the radar guidance all around that area, and that's absolutely amazing. Yeah, we're coming to the end, which is good because my voice is about to crack up. So from the initial conception of radar through to that sort of level of complexity was about 9 or 10 years, which is an amazing leap forward in what happened. And initially they just had to rely on trying to scrounge components from the telecoms industry to cobble together a system. And then they just sort of threw everything and so much money at it, both ourselves and the Americans after they took over the production. They just threw so much money at it and see what happens in sort of times of need. And right up to today, well, we got the microwave oven, which was sort of discovered by one of the Rad Lab engineers in America, walking past the transmitter he was testing, or the magnetron, and a chocolate bar melting in his pocket. Oh, that's a good idea. And he came up with the first microwave ovens, which were called the radar ranges. They were massive, great things. That's back in the late 40s, early 50s. And now we've got sort of gigahertz car parking aids and all sorts, which Paul works on and that sort of thing. No?
No. Well, no, SARS.
Not synthetic aperture radar then.
No.
Okay. One more thing going backwards. There was an awful lot of countermeasures going on between the Germans and us and everyone else. And one of the things that is used today on our fighter aircraft is called passive radar, where it doesn't rely on a transmitted pulse coming from the aircraft. It uses the transmitters that are already out there. So radio stations, radio cabin or whatever, it can use that to identify aircraft. The Germans were doing this with our chain home. They were using the chain home pulses themselves to track our aircraft coming across the channel to bomb them. So that completes the talk. I hope everyone's still awake. Hope my voice is all right tomorrow. It won't be. Oh, I've got a question. Here we go.
You know, the penultimate slide where you had a map on of the V1 rockets that have fallen on there.
Yeah.
Did they have any form of radar of sorts on so that they could locate where they were? I mean, how was that map created through the radar technology?
No, that's just the anti-aircraft crew saying, yeah, we shot one, it went down there.
Oh, right.
That sort of thing.
Well, you can ask me.
An awful lot of the stuff I got is either out of books or online. I've either taken photographs out of books or I've just copied something online. So thanks to everyone online that I might have copied bits and pieces from. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, or anything?
In the early days when they had those
Yeah.
couldn't the Germans see them?
Yeah, but they had, like I said, they'd gone up and down with the Zeppelin and thought, oh, that's nothing to do with radar. It's they thought it was some sort of naval communication system. I thought it was some long-range naval communication system or very early radio detection finding. For locating our aircraft one at a time by triangulation. No. No.
Especially if they were operating at high frequency.
They were used to UHF.
Right. Well, thank you very much for listening. Oh, we've got another question. Go ahead.
I was going to say before the war, British scientists on RDF.
Yeah. Yeah, we called it RDF as a sort of a ruse. The Americans come up with the word radar, which is radio detection and ranging. And it's been adopted by everyone since then. It was RDF as an original thing. Okay.
Last one, yeah.
Nigel. What?
On the Brunabel Ray.
Yeah. No, they took the dipoles. Yeah. Don't know. You tell me. I wasn't there. You might have been there. How old are you? Not quite. It's all right. I know Nigel. It's all right. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gents. Oh yeah. The sound mirrors on Romney Marsh.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Is that the Romney Marsh?
Yeah. You need to take some wellies, I think, don't you? It's a bit damp down there.
Like a little canal, like a lock, with a big wall.
Yeah.
And they leave that open, but when they're doing it, they close it. You can
Oh, lovely.
walk across. Like
I've seen them from a distance, but I've never actually been up to them.
We went years back.
Superb. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good meeting.